A budget is telling where the money needs to go instead of wondering where it went. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Tonight, our topic of discussion is Budget 2017. Will the Budget 2017 make sure that you at home will get rich, or does it mean that you will have to spend your money and not have anything by the end of the year? Where is the country's economy really heading? 2017 budget. Is the government having its priorities right? Is the government moving forward, trying to achieve its budget deficit of 4.7%? To discuss all this and more, we have with us four eminent personalities in the studio with us today. Let me introduce them to you. Joining us today for the first time is Mr. Fazal Mushin, Chairman of the Exporters Association of Sri Lanka. Nice to have you on board. Good evening to you, Fazal.
Good evening. Good evening.
Also joining us this evening is Shiran Fernando, Lead Economist, Frontier Research. Nice to have you on board as well for the first time, Shiran.
Good evening.
Good evening as well. Joining us this evening is Anushka Vijayasinghe, Chief Economist, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. No stranger to the show. Nice to have you on board as well. Again,
good to be here, Shamil.
Also joining us this evening is Dumendhu Hulangamwa, partner, Ernst & Young, Sri Lanka. Let's start off tonight's discussion with Dumendhu Hulangamwa, partner, Ernst & Young, Sri Lanka. Dumendhu, 2 years ago when I interviewed you, you were very bullish about the country's economy. You said all good things about the country's economy. 2016 was a miracle of Asia, according to you. However, now things are looking somewhat bleak. What is your take about the country's economy? Are we on the right track? Are we achieving our targeted growth? The time starts now.
Yeah, good evening, Shamil. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this session. You seem to have a very good memory about the discussion we had 2 years ago. I cannot recollect what exactly I told, but I'm always a very positive person, so being bullish then and being bullish now as well.
Being bullish now, do you think that the country's economy is really facing a problem right now?
You see, when you say economy, if I talk to you on taxation, where I think there are economists who might share with you on the economic side of it. But from a tax point of view, we had a new government coming in last year, and the new government wanted to make certain changes to the tax system with regard to both income tax, VAT, NBT. They want to make certain substantial structural changes, which I thought was too early. First year in government, I thought they should allow the system to stabilize and then take an account of the situation and gone for changes if they wanted to. Because I feel that our tax system went through a major reform in 2011, where the government very clearly announced with regard to exemptions that they were removing the exemptions. They gave a 4-year time period. With regard to VAT, the rates were maintained at a consistent rate of 11%. The NBT rates were maintained consistently. So there was an element of predictability as far as business was concerned. So that is probably what I told you in 2014, and that we didn't have. If you look at the budgets from 2011 to 14, there were hardly any changes in taxation because it was fairly consistent. But in 2016, or rather 2015, we had these two budgets that came in. One was the one that came immediately after the elections, where there was super gains tax, which I thought was something different to the usual tax system. And there was a lot of negativity as far as super gains tax was concerned, the way it was computed, the concept, the base on which it was taxed. It was very unpopular as far as business was concerned. So the first message was not very good. Then thereafter, in the budget of 2015, which they had in November last year, the changes that were proposed were not implemented. If you look at the budget, they proposed a different. I think they proposed 12.5% of VAT and 8% VAT. Eventually, when it came at 15% VAT. Then the thresholds were changed. The people who should be taxed, like wholesale retailers, not there in the budget. So all those gave mixed signals as far as the tax system of the country was concerned. For example, if you take 2015 proposals not enacted as of yet. So That is where I think there has been inconsistency as far as the implementation of the tax system.
Respective governments, Davinder, have faced many problems. Example, collecting the expected revenue. How can you really do this? Every government has faced this problem over the years.
Yes, so the expected revenue has been achieved according to the government. Now, I think this year they have achieved almost 20% more than last year. You see, the revenue also has to be. You see, what we do is we do deficit financing in our budgets. So we do the expenditure first and then work out the revenue. So when the expenditure is going up, naturally then you have to find money to tax. New sources of revenue have to be found by the government. So as you know, there was a substantial increase in publicity salaries last year. Then the oil price reduction, I think those contributed to a huge deficit. And as a result, then the government has to increase taxes in order to cover those deficits. So whether those monies are going to viable investments, whether they are giving the productivity that we need, because after all, Sri Lanka depends about 80% of our revenue come from taxation. So how much more that you can tax, you see, because you can't reach a level beyond which you tax and people will not pay tax and they can't afford to pay tax. So you have to keep the affordability level as well. So that is where I think the government needs to look at to see whether you need to take substantial fundamental reform as soon as this, or you take step at a time.
Thank you very much. That of course was Davinder Hulangama, partner of Ernst & Young Sri Lanka. And now move my attention to Shiran Fernando, lead economist, Frontier Research. Shiran, first time on the show. Is there a problem with the country's economy? Is it good? Is it bad? Or is it really worse? Your time starts now.
I think the worst is sort of, if you could say, behind us. If you look in a very optimistic sense of the word. 2015 you had a sort of a democratic election transition cycle. So that sort of, the politics sort of dominated probably the economics of things. So 2016 was more of a stabilization year, where in the end the government needed to go to the IMF and get this reform package on play. So 2017, 18, I mean, are the key years to get some of the reforms done. Not maybe get it done 100%, but if you at least get about 50% of the done, in particular on the tax side, because you started by saying, you know, is your revenue being used properly? Is your taxes at work, basically? But since 1988 or 87, our revenue has not been able to, you know, keep up even with our current expenditure, let alone the public expenditure. So we've not had a revenue surplus or deficit, if I were to put it that way. So the next few years are crucial in terms of, you know, getting some of these structural reforms done to stabilize the economy and then move it forward, I think.
Shay, you said something very interesting. You said that we've put the past worst behind us. However, taking a look at the recent statements being made by high-ranking officials of the government, does that give you an amber light as far as investor confidence is concerned? Do you think the investors are now fearing to invest in Sri Lanka, thinking whether the government has suddenly taken a U-turn? What's your take on this?
It's difficult to judge here what different, you know, government officials say. An investment is a thing where you get a lot of mixed signal. But from a foreign investor perspective, I think a lot of them are very optimistic. I just returned last week from meeting several investors. And a lot of them see, a lot of them also echo the sentiment that, you know, the economy has gone through this transition, is shifting towards a more positive rebalance. And you know, somewhat echoing the right things continuously. So I would sort of, you know, get back this investment mold back into play, because in the past the fiscal side of things also has been driven a lot by what's gone on in terms of debt and a lot of the public infrastructure projects, and that being, you know, debt driven. So the investment side of things, if it's driven more by FDI, and that really requires investor sentiment to improve. So
now, Sharon, you said that following the 8th of January 2015 polls in Sri Lanka, investor confidence have increased. Where is the FDI we are supposed to see during the last 1.5 years?
Well, it's definitely not come as it should have. I think it's partly to do with the economy, in terms of a lot of people were sort of factoring a bit of a depreciation in as well. So investors generally come in after the economy stabilizes. They don't want to take a depreciation hit once the investment is done. And also, I mean, things like the taxes, what do they get? What are their incentives, which is not clear.
So you're saying, in other words, that the economy is not stabilized yet. We have problems with the country's economy.
Not as yet, but it's sort of heading in that direction, and that's where the budget is sort of crucial to kick it into that gear.
Thank you very much. That, of course, was Shiran Fernando, lead economist, Frontier Research. I now move my attention to the familiar face in the show today, Anushka Singer, Chief Economist, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Nice to have you on board, Anushka, after a lapse of a few months. You've heard the Finance Minister, Ravi Karunayaka, saying that his objective for the budget is to bring down the budget deficit to 4.7% of GDP, increase government revenues to around 14.2% of GDP, and present a development-oriented budget. Is this the budget that we will be seeing, something similar to the last year's budget, that is the 2016 budget? You had the Finance Minister saying a lot of things. However, even before the ink dried, nothing was materialized. Everything changed overnight. Something of that sort this year as well. You represent the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. What is your take?
So Shamir, the short answer is hopefully not. Hopefully we won't see a repeat of it. I think what most of the private sector is keen on right now is seeing that the forthcoming budget is more aligned with the Prime Minister's policy vision that he set out last year, exactly a year ago. We hear he's going to release a 4-year or 1,500-day economic strategy. Now this time those two, the budget and that statement, have to go very much in line, both for the public to instill confidence that there is an economic plan, to the private sector to articulate this is the economic vision and these are the things we're going to do, and also honestly to public officials, because right now we don't have public officials don't have a reference document to say this is the government's economic strategy. So in that sense, I think one very crucial element in that is getting this budget right. Now you quoted what the Finance Minister is aspiring to. I think it's a good aspiration. We have to rely on growth, we have to focus on development, but a development-oriented budget shouldn't be just handouts and welfare and subsidies, and we shouldn't give in to that tendency, and that has been the Achilles heel of most budgets in the past. But of course, at the same time, also having to look at, we are currently under an IMF program with certain benchmarks that we have agreed to, and keeping in line with those, as well as achieving a development-oriented budget, will of course be tricky. So I think there we really need to see that in this budget, development-oriented means making it easier for the private sector, whether it's large or small, to thrive. Initiatives that create jobs, cuts where cuts are necessary, but not where it will hurt.
4.7% of the GDP. Is it a realistic target as far as the budget deficit is concerned?
I think, Shamir, it will have to depend on what happens in the next few months related to the taxes and tax changes that were proposed last year and not implemented. We did see that we have seen in the first 4 to 5 months of this year, tax revenue has been higher than the same period last year, but it is well below the targets that the government had set itself as estimates. And subsequent to that, even though that period was good, then came the VAT gridlock. And so these few months will be quite tricky in terms of revenue. So I'm not optimistic, but of course, again, there is this IMF watchdog now. So I don't think the Finance Minister is not appreciative of the fact that we have to get these targets.
Also, why I'm posing this question to you is 2015 budget, when President Mahinda Rajapaksa, in his capacity as the Minister of Finance, said that his objective is to reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.4% of the GDP. It ended up at 7.4%, 68% more than the projected result or the outcome. Will something of that sort transpire by the end of 2017?
Shamir, it's always possible. Sri Lanka has had a consistent problem for years over successive regimes to get the budget deficit right, and we keep going back and forth on this. But interestingly, from around in the period that Duminda was talking about, when those tax changes were made, we were on a fiscal consolidation path, and that was also during a period of part of the period was with the IMF package. So one hopes that if you take away what happened in 2015, part of 2016, and move forward the latter part of 2016 and 17 and 18 under the IMF package, that there will be more discipline. Because we have to remember that unlike ever before, Sri Lanka is now vulnerable to international capital markets. International investors are watching to see, will Sri Lanka be disciplined on the fiscal front or not? And we don't have the leeway that we may have had 5-10 years ago.
Thank you very much, Anushka, for your thoughts. But before moving to Mr. Fazal Mushrin, Chairman of Exporters Association of Sri Lanka, one more question to you, something very simple and something I need a bit of clarification before we move on to Fazal. You have a budget, then you have supplementary estimates. Why? So what is the reason behind this?
See, Bishamir, I think honestly it comes down to a combination of bad planning at the start, and we've had this. This is not new this year or last year. It's been happening for many years. But it's also that, you know, it's what Duminda said. We end up spending and then trying to find ways to find the money. Instead of first looking at line by line, I would think we should now, especially at a time when we are having to tighten our purse strings, line by line look at where are the revenue leakages happening. What is Sri Lanka, the public sector, spending on? 80% of public spending still goes on recurrent spending, which is salaries and pensions and wages and all of that. And then you're left with such little to spend on people's needs like healthcare and education and job creation initiatives. So I think that's really something we need to look at, because the more we keep spending beyond our means, the supplementary estimates, giving into various needs that come in halfway through, the whole credibility of our budget process is gone.
Thank you very much, Anushka Vijayasinghe, Chief Economist of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. I now move my attention to Fazal Mushrin, Chairman of the Exporters Association of Sri Lanka. Fazal, not a good year as far as the tea exports are concerned. You see a lot of garment factory owners in Sri Lanka moving to countries like Ethiopia, Cambodia. My question to you is very simple. What are we really exporting now that generates foreign revenue? Your time starts now.
Thank you, Shamir, for having me here in this show today.
Nice to have you on the board as well.
I think we all know what's happening. Contribution from exports has been declining year on year. It is not relevant only to tea, it is relevant to all other industries. Of course, the global market space impacts us. It is not necessarily a local thing, it's also what's happening globally. So the oil price is going down, commodity prices going down, recession taking place in Europe, and of course US is a bit better off now, but all these have an impact on us. Then when you look at our basket, it has remained the same. If you look at even the export sector as such, successive governments have neglected the export sector. Although in the previous government they spoke about a hub and various other free port, etc. These are nice words, but there's nothing really in reality happening except a word defining certain activity. Now, we felt neglected for many years of different governments coming in and not really supporting exports, and as the other speakers said, that we have been focusing on development, infrastructure and spending money in that area and not concentrating on setting the correct environment for exports to thrive and moving out of the traditional basket. We are competing, if you take tea, with other countries producing it cheaper than us. If you take garments, we have now other countries producing cheaper. Take Bangladesh, benefited from Sri Lanka, and of course now things are turning back again towards us, but countries benefited, and their exports, Bangladesh is around 26 billion just in garments alone. So we lost out because of the lack of focus on trying to keep the existing industries and expand into other areas. So to give you an answer why it's declining, it's actually so many different reasons to it. It's not just one particular reason.
Fazal, you said something very interesting. You said that a word defining certain activities, and this is the notion of the previous regime. What assurances do you have from the present regime that this wouldn't be the same?
Well, we were we were very upbeat when the Prime Minister made his policy statement, as Anushka said in 2015, and we were all for it because we wanted a different vision, a different thinking to open out and have a policy that is conducive for not only local investors but also foreign investors. And as Shiran said, people want to come, but it's not conducive. So you have to understand it has to be conducive for both parties. But the budget started off, but then didn't materialize last year. So we hope this year, with the IMF having his eyes on us, that we will have a better budget than what we had last year to help the export sector, which needs a lot of focus at the moment.
Fazal, last year, just a few weeks prior to the budget speech made by Minister Ravi Karunayaka, the finance minister, the Prime Minister made a policy statement.
Yes.
However, this time around, you don't see a policy statement. So everything is going to rely on the finance minister's speech, or what's going to happen?
We are awaiting the Prime Minister's trade policy and the new agency for international trade. Our system is complex. It doesn't allow us to do, or at least the government can't do what it actually talks about because of the complexity of the different overlapping ministries, the legislation that is in place. We talk about the ease of doing business today. If you sum it up, I think we need to improve our index and take away most of these bureaucratic hurdles that we face. So we await the trade policy of the Prime Minister, give life to the international trade agency. That will boost some mechanism for us to do business in a more in a friendly environment. It's not about talking about Singapore, but actually having a strategy to achieve what Singapore is. And I think the Malaysian model, which they have, again they use Singapore as a benchmark. We need to have some sort of dynamic approach like that, and it starts with the trade policy.
Thank you very much, Fazal Mashin, Chairman of the Exporters Association of Sri Lanka. Let me open the floor to our journalists. Let me introduce them to you very quickly. Nadim Majid on to my right, on to my immediate left is Sonali Vanagabaduge, and on to my far left is Shahin Jurampal. Nice to have you on board, Shahin, after a lapse of 10 months, am I right?
Pretty much, nice to be back, Sean.
So let's start off tonight's Q&A with Sonali, who is also an attorney at law. All yours.
Thank you, Shamir, and very happy 31st birthday to you.
Thank you very much for mentioning my age on the show on national television, Sonali.
Anushka, my first question is to you. Mr. Mushin spoke about the lackadaisical performance of Sri Lanka's exports. Why is it that exports haven't done well? And added to this, the looming power crisis. Are we trying to make ourselves uncompetitive? I mean, it's not rocket science, is it? How do we proceed from this point on?
You're right, Sonali, about the exports, and I think it's now a little worse than it has been over the last few years, but this is not new. Over the last few years, the growth model of the economy has taken a turn, and we can no longer rely on the post-war bump we got, mainly driven by domestic consumption, wholesale, retail trade, some of the public infrastructure projects. Honestly, we had for many years we've had an anti-export bias in our policies, particularly trade policy. So I'm not surprised that where we are right now. But of course, added to that, we have, as Fazal mentioned, a lot of international dynamics that are making it worse. Let's take tea, for example, with problems in the Middle East and Russia, various geopolitical issues. In addition to the oil prices being low, very low during 2015 and early 2016, our tea prices and tea volumes took a sharp hit. Now we're seeing some recovery. So on tea, that was the issue. On apparels, of course, Europe is one of our big markets. Europe hasn't been doing too well. In the US, it's doing a bit better. So in some of our big export categories, there have been some big problems. But I think on a positive note, what we're seeing is we may not see in the headline numbers big sectors doing really well, but there are some several companies that because of their strategy, because of the markets they're in, because of innovation, they're doing really well, and they don't, of course, because of the bigger export picture, it gets masked. So I think I'm am worried because of the overall export numbers, but I'm optimistic because of some of these firms. And I think what we need to do both in the private sector is for other firms to look at these and see what can I do to be successful like them, and for the government to help exporters like that and ease some of their constraints instead of bringing in new burdens. And of course, one of the burdens is our cost of electricity. Some say that we are less competitive than our competitors in the region on electricity costs, and of course, having power outages and all doesn't help. But to be honest, I think most businesses who operate in environments like Sri Lanka know how to prepare for this. It's an added cost to run a generator, yes, but they're ready for this. More than that, the big constraints are the policy inconsistencies, for instance, on tax, on these multiple agencies and different rules that are not matching up, or lack of coordination between agencies. I think those are more problematic. And of course, the external markets.
Shiran, do you think that Sri Lanka is resorting to its tea and apparel sector and the traditional exports? Do you think we are running the risk of being orthodox in our approach, or do you think that we need to diversify, or is it already being done?
So in terms of the manufacturing and what you can export in the traditional sense, yes, I think if you look at it, it's like a company that has 2 or 3 products and 2 or 3 markets or 2 to 5 markets, and it's suddenly not doing too well. So you haven't diversified enough, and you're going to take a hit. But if you look at the services side, I think if you look at in that aspect, we are sort of diversifying, getting more KPOs into the country. There is a lot of interest in that. So if you look at in that perspective, we are sort of improving, and also what's happening with the tourism industry, the organic growth that you're seeing within the industry, both in the formal sector as well as the informal sector. So that is sort of cushioning the lack of growth that we're seeing in the traditional exports.
Mr. Fazal, now at every press briefing we attend, or we show it on the media, several ministers and so on, government officials bombarded with facts and figures, saying we need to strive the economy based on an export-driven economy. They throw on so many figures on your face. But given the statements that the 4 of you are given today, the export sector in Sri Lanka has clearly crashed. Does that mean that this government has failed in that particular department?
I wouldn't use the word crashed or failed. Fact is, we have to get the policy correct, and the environment has to be set. Talk is cheap. I agree with you. Some people speak to the gallery, and I think most politicians here speak to the gallery. But behind the scenes, as Anushka mentioned, there are companies who are doing some incredible stuff here. And there are companies who have moved away. We need to retain the traditional basket. We can't afford to lose the traditional basket of products. But at the same time, we need to grow. Like Thailand, if you take an example of their growth, it has come from new businesses or new lines of business in other areas other than the traditional basket which they had. So we need to think in line of how do we get those sectors going, and to do that, our policy must be correct. The policies that are currently that we operate under, and of course the exporters and other players in the private sector has been very resilient in how they survive all these years. And it's very competitive out there. I mean, there are other countries coming online which are far cheaper, they are smarter, and we need to move away from this low tech to high tech. We need to make things that are more, we can use our core competencies, whether it's our location, whether it's our human resources that we have here. We need to look at those factors, and that's why I think the service sector is benefiting because of the talent pool we have here, and we are using it. We need to think out of the box, but to do anything, consistent policy. We can't have ad hoc changes from policymakers defining how we do our business. So these are the inconsistencies that we face.
Mr. Fazal, you said we are supposed to think out of the box. This may sound a bit sarcastic, I apologize. But do you think we are even in the box?
I can partly agree with you. But then as business people, we have to think out of the box because it is our survival. Government will come and say, tax us, put various, at the end of the day, we have to survive, and that's why I say companies have been very resilient in how they survived all these years. If you take our products, it's still garments, tea, which is getting hit, and housemaids. I mean, is this exports?
Fazal, you said that business people should think out of the box. Liberalization of the tea industry in Sri Lanka, something that many companies are trying to vie for, want to achieve at the end of the day. And then you have a few companies who are saying, no, we have to go in for Ceylon POT, we have to ensure that we keep the traditional tea. What are the risks of Sri Lanka really losing our international market because of this particular notion? Are we really thinking out of the box?
Well, that's not about thinking out of the box, it's about self-interested one survival. If you look at the global tea market itself, the iced tea market is the growing market. The tea served with milk, which the traditional tea that we are used to, is now predominantly more in the UK or in where the British colonies are. Whereas other countries, if you take Dubai as an example, is now a trading hub for tea. So if we are going to sit on our laurels and think about our Ceylon tea being the best tea in the world, then we are just fooling ourselves, because we need to be realistic today. The world is producing tea in several places cheaper than us, and we need to be market savvy to think out of the box. And if we have to open, we have to open. We cannot have a closed door policy. You take other countries like India, all opening up.
Tuminda, I want your input on the matter of fiscal discipline. We heard both Anushka say as well that there's a need for fiscal discipline and financial discipline. Do you really think that it is realistic to expect fiscal discipline on the part of the government, considering what we have seen in just this past year and a half, almost 2 years, that this government, including the 100-day government, have been in power? The willy-nilly handing out of welfare and taking welfare for themselves as well in the form of luxury vehicles. Do you think you really can expect, do you think there is political will among this country's legislators? Because they're acting like we're not broke, but the reality is we are broke.
Yeah, you see, even if they have the political will, you see, in the end, they're all politicians, right? So, the fiscal discipline does not come because of the subsidies we give. If it ranges from Samruddhi to fertilizer subsidy, to increments to government service salaries, that are not proportionately done. You see, so all this is done by successive governments for popularity, for votes, for survival. Because after all, you can do reform, you can encourage exports, you can put money into infrastructure. Given all that, you'll still be in power, right? So after doing all that, if you're out of power, there's no point doing all that. So that is also necessary for a political party. I mean, not only here. Sorry, if I may finish. Even if you look at and listen to the American elections, I mean, Hillary Clinton is talking of increased taxes, whereas Trump is talking reduced taxes. Sanders is talking of welfare. So it happens all over the world. I don't think it is confined to Sri Lanka. But in our case, what happens is our resources are so small that we can ill afford to spend too much.
But my question was more specific. Now, I understand the fact that a lot of these welfare programs are brought on from other governments, like the fertilizer. I'm asking about the political will even in this government to have fiscal discipline, because even when you have a chance to be cost effective, to be frugal, they'd rather be extravagant and lavish. Going back again to that particular incident of the vehicles, I mean, surely by that time when they were trying to get these vehicles down, they must have realized that, hey, we are the leaders of a broke country. We can't be doing this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I won't pardon the current government also in this aspect. But it is not something peculiar only to this government. I mean, I must say some element of financial discipline. You remember this government was in power in 2001, or this party was in 2001. They actually honestly wanted to sort of political reform in cutting down expenses, in cutting down expenditure, in cutting down recruitment to government service, etc. But they lost elections, right?
Anushka,
So what is the message people also give?
Yeah. Anushka, in order for Budget 2017 to be meaningful, to we heard the Prime Minister's policy statement in 2015. We haven't really heard a policy statement, but we heard from the Prime Minister about his trade-intensive approach of tapping into the Bay of Bengal region as well. What sectors should the government really be focusing on in this budget in order to achieve those goals?
So, Nadeem, I think one thing to be cautious about is expecting too much from a budget in driving growth. So what I wouldn't want to see, for instance, is some generous tax incentives that are granted to supposedly promote a certain sector that the government has identified, and we don't know under what reason it had identified. Because in the past we saw many instances where there were very ill thought out policies. For instance, generous incentives given to start domestic manufacturing of import substitution industries, whether it's cement or various other, and those were ill targeted. So my first point would be, I wouldn't want to see too much that's tinkered with, whether it's in terms of special packages or special incentives for some targeted sectors. I would much rather, and I think this is echoed across the private sector, much rather see more broad-based things that are done to help more broad-based sectors. So for instance, I'll give you an example. In SMEs, for many years we've relied on these concessionary tax regimes or concessionary loan schemes, thinking that that would be the fix for SMEs. But we still have 93% of our businesses that are below 5 employees and a very large informal sector, and many SMEs haven't grown up. But at the same time, in the last budget, we saw a 60,000 rupee fee on businesses, regardless of the size, regardless of how much money they're making, a 250,000 rupee closing down fee. Who would start a business, who would formally register a business if you know if it's not working out, you have to pay 250,000. So those are things that I wouldn't want to see in this budget, because that discourages a whole bunch of people, whether you're a small IT guy or whether you're doing a small agricultural project. These hurt. So and this similar things in other sectors also. I'd much rather see broad-based incentives and broad-based programs that help business. But if I was to say sectors, not to give special incentives, but things that help sectors, I would certainly see logistics is a big play for Sri Lanka with the location. Various policies that could promote logistics. I don't have the specific policies with me right now, but for instance, the e-hub strategy, which is connecting it electronically, those are things that could tap into a growing sector for Sri Lanka, like logistics.
And finally, Shiran, before we move on to the next round, I also want to ask you, what specifically would you like to see in this budget in order to improve Sri Lanka's standing in terms of the ease of doing business?
So in terms of that, I think the main thing is not to hurt investor sentiment or business sentiment, because in the previous budgets, especially the one with the super gains tax, it caught a lot of businesses off guard. It did not help the investment climate. So avoid things that will take a step back rather than take at least one step forward. And of course, things like the SMEs, things that Anushka highlighted, in that sort of thing, and also things like taxes, improving tax administration, things like that, which previously sort of have brought down our rankings. And the other thing, I guess, for the success of the budget and even in terms of improving the business rankings, is the execution of some of the policies.
Sharon, the government imposed a super gain tax. Did companies really pay this tax in question?
Yes, they have.
Thank you very much. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's more on Budget 2016. We'll tell you how you at home can get rich. All this and more after a short commercial break. Not talking about Singapore, but should work towards achieving this target. Maybe it's not Singapore that we need. Maybe it's a model adopted in Malaysia. We start off the third round with Fazal Musheen, Chairman of the Exporters Association of Sri Lanka, who just expressed his sentiment a short while ago. You speak about policy consistency. You spoke about what policies should entail of. What sort of policy do you really envisage for a country like Sri Lanka by the end of 2017, Fazal?
If you look around, if you're a local exporter, the number of ministries or institutions one has to visit to get as a startup approvals, then going to get if we are, whether it's environmental, municipal, you need to keep going from place to place. On the other end, you look at Singapore, you can sit here in 15 minutes, float a company, and you're ready to go. If you look at Dubai, they give you everything so long as you bring the money to set up there. And several of our companies have also now migrated overseas because of some of these issues. Then some of the restrictions that are being placed upon importing, the tire industry recently went through that, and they shifted some of their production to Vietnam because there were restrictions in importing the rubber because of the local sentiments that the ministry couldn't go against the local rubber producers. So these are some of the other issues that.
But the local producer also should be protected at the end of the day, Fazal.
Yes, but it's a competitive world. You can't keep having a protectionist policy when you are hurting an industry that is a growing industry. Otherwise, there should be some zones, as we have been told, hub zones, etc., where you can do the business of entrepreneur trading or manufacturing, and we need to do away with even. Look at the amount of ministries that are promoting exports and industries. Look at the places that you need to go to get approvals to set up your industry. Then you have the BOI, you have the EDB, you have the Ministry of Development and International Trade. Then you have minor export crop doing export promotion, then production.
So Fazal, simply put, you are trying to say that Sri Lanka does not have the conducive environment for FDIs to come to the country and invest and ensure that their business also grow in the country.
Leave alone FDIs, we are talking about even Sri Lankan investors. We need to be seen that we have the even playing field, that a local investor also must be treated equally as a FDI. So neither is assisted in the current environment that we work. We hope the new trade policy will open these doors and do away with a lot of these hurdles that we face. Even in terms of free flow of money or repatriation of funds. We need to, if you are talking Singapore, we need to behave like Singapore.
Fazal, this government has repeatedly said that they are willing to listen to the business community, to organizations like yours. Have you raised this issue up with the relevant officials, with the relevant ministries?
Yes.
And what have been the response?
I think that I must give due credit that at least this government is listening. It's just that we want them to walk the talk with us. We have been able to talk to the relevant ministries. We have developed our own strategic plan which we have given to government. They have taken some of our ideas on board. So we are having a better relationship now. We have always asked for open door policy. It is coming. We want more private public engagement where we can drive even what happens at the EDB or at the BOI, and we don't want multiple agencies doing the same thing. As you know, that there's a tea board, someone promoting rubber, there's so many duplicating agencies.
Listing alone is not sufficient. Thank you very much, Fazal Musheen, Chairman of the Exporters Association of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Anushka Vijayasinghe, Chief Economist, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Bad planning at the start, and that is what exactly you said in your opening remarks. Bad planning at the start. Why must the people pay the brunt? Because of bad planning. Your time starts now.
I don't think they should pay that price, Shamir. And I think it's fair for people to be impatient and frustrated. And I think what the sense I get is that no one is expecting reform to happen overnight. Many of the problems we are seeing today, whether it's the budget, whether it's exports, are problems that have been culminating for some time now. So I don't think whether it's the private sector or the public at large are expecting big reforms overnight. But what most would expect is sensible steps moving forward instead of moving back. So a sensible step wouldn't be to impose a super gains tax. A sensible step wouldn't be to impose very harsh restrictions on repatriation of export proceeds. A sensible step wouldn't be to, at the same time you're asking people to pay VAT on new items or a higher rate of VAT, to see their political leaders importing expensive luxury vehicles. So I think that is really what needs to be focused on now. The irritants that Fazal talked about that are holding business back, I think the bigger reforms can't happen overnight, sometimes even shouldn't happen overnight. There must be a sequencing, otherwise there could be political ramifications. But I think there are a lot of things that can be done which don't require big planning, that just require sensibility and sensitivity to private sector needs, exporters' needs, people's needs, that can be done. And maybe all of these don't need to come in a budget, to be honest. We may be putting too much emphasis on the budget. It would be nicer to see throughout the year consistent policies, throughout the year more facilitation by government.
Anushka, is the government on the right footing or the right path, or has the IMF dragged the government and put it on the path that is required for them to walk? What is the notion, what is the thinking behind the involvement of the IMF?
So Shamir, I think we need to look at what the IMF and Sri Lanka have signed on to do, and to see, are these things that make sense for Sri Lanka to do anyway, whether the IMF was here or not. And I would argue that they are things that Sri Lanka needs to do, whether it's fiscal consolidation, whether it's restructuring and potentially selling stakes of the loss-making state-owned enterprises, reforming the tax administration. All of these things that are part of the IMF-Sri Lanka deal, I think are good things that we should be doing anyway, and we have got a nice amount of leeway thanks to the IMF. Now yes, IMF will act as a watchdog, so there is this set of eyes, but honestly I don't think that there is a sense of a stranglehold, because there are very smart people in the Ministry of Finance and Treasury, there are in many other ministries who know what we can do, what is feasible and what can't be done. But on your first part of your question on does the government have a plan, the sense we get is there is a plan. And you hear the Prime Minister last year, and we're hoping this year in the new statement, there is a plan. For instance, reorienting towards exports and FDI, signing various trade deals to open our market up, making it easier for business. So all the overtures are being made. What we'd like to see now is articulate that plan, give a document that tells the world, that tells the Sri Lankan people, that tells the private sector, that tells fellow ministers and ministry officials, this is the plan, and that is what we are yet to see, and that's not good.
Thank you very much, Anushka Singh, Chief Economist of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. We now move our attention to Shiran Fernando, Lead Economist of Frontier Research. Shiran, because you were comparing the previous regime to now and how things have worked out quite well for the government in terms of attracting the international community, my question to you is very simple. The previous regime said that they consider the private sector to be the engine of growth. However, this did not materialize. 2015, the first budget presented by Finance Minister Ravi Karunayaka was viewed as a vengeful budget. 2017 budget, what exactly would happen? Do you think that the private sector will get an opportunity to exploit the Sri Lankan market, to move forward, invest in Sri Lanka, give an opportunity to people out there, and ensure that the unemployment rate goes down? Or will it again be a vengeful budget, as we saw in 2015? Your time starts now.
So I don't have a crystal ball in front of me to sort of give you the...
I can give you some predictions if you want to.
The yes or no answer to that, but I think you can't you've gone the 2015 budget sort of was a low in terms of the sentiment and the impacts that some of the policies sort of took place. So it's difficult to see that stick sort of being used in future budgets as well, in particular with the IMF on board. I think the private sector is not looking, I think, for special favors or anything like that. But the private sector is looking for, and for it to be the engine of growth, is for the government to tick off some of the low-hanging fruits. You know, cut the bureaucracy and the red tape when it comes to exports, set in place, you know, a BOI or a one-stop shop or a one access route for FDI. You know, set those in place and let the private sector run with it. Because right now, it's the private sector trying to advise the government to sort of fix it up and then trying to run with it, which is not entirely working right now, because the government has a lot of is looking at several different things. So I think they need to focus on a few low-hanging fruits, and once they sort of put that in place, put the focus on achieving these low-hanging fruits, the private sector will run with it. And it's not only the budget that's really required to run with it. I think budget is a statement of sentiment and, you know, a policy statement for the private sector to sort of take it forward. But beyond that, the implementation and getting these structures in place.
Bad planning at the start, that is what Anushka Vijayasinghe said about introducing supplementary budget estimates. Do you think that the government is on the wrong footing overall? They got the wrong start?
In 2015 or?
2015, yes, you're right.
So I mean, if you look at the politics of the thing, they were looking ahead of the parliamentary election. So they were, you know, aiming to sort of be re-elected in that sense, though it was a presidential election. So it was difficult to see maybe if, you know, revenue measures that were expenditure that was supposed to, you know, reduce. But what you didn't sort of expect was things like super gains taxes and things like that to sort of be in the basket, so sort of go against what traditionally what people or the private sector thought of this government when they came in.
Shiran, just prior to the presidential elections on the 8th of January 2015, because you are drawing a parallel between what happened before and what happened now afterwards, many individuals in the opposition then, now in government, said that Sri Lanka is a debt-ridden nation. There is millions of dollars to pay, billions of dollars to pay in debt. However, several months after the present regime took over, following the 17th of August elections, they don't even know the numbers. Can this really happen? Or are they misleading the public again? They said, we don't know what the figures are. It's so much, they hid it from us. Can that happen in a country's economy?
Whether it's, I think, 76% of GDP or 80% or 90%, you can debate that, but the fact is it's still high compared to the revenue that we are earning, compared to the exports that we're this thing. It's not a sustainable model.
Okay, can you buy the fact that the present regime did not know how much debt they had to pay?
I mean,
in economic perspective, you're an economist.
So there is a lot of, for example, you know, off-sheet balancing that goes on even within the budgets in terms of the treasury, the state guarantees that come on these some of these loans. So some of them even don't come onto the fiscal deficit. It's off the books because it's state guarantee and you expect the loans to continue. So a mixture of those would obviously add to the loans, and it doesn't give you when you look at the true picture, if it's 76% of debt, it doesn't give you the true picture of things. So if you look at some of the off-sheet balance arguments, I think
this government cannot be blamed fully to the mess that we are in right now.
It's difficult to blame, you know, one or the other government. I think for a consistent part from successive governments, I think policy has sort of led to this juncture.
Thank you very much, Shiran Fernando, lead economist, Frontier Research. And now we move our attention to Dubindu Hulangama, a partner E&Y Sri Lanka. Now, interestingly, the finance minister of Sri Lanka, his name is being spoke of a lot today because of the budget 2017. The finance minister told the International Monetary Fund's annual meeting the government had a strong commitment to increase government revenue through further expanding the tax base and improvement in tax administration, and to reduce the fiscal deficit to the targeted budget deficit of 5.5% 4% in 2016 and 4.7% respectively in the year 2017. For those who are watching us today at home, what does it mean? Words like expanding the tax base, improvement in tax administration. Does this mean that taxes are going to be slapped on the ordinary people of Sri Lanka? Must they tighten their belts? What does it really mean?
Well, I really don't know what the finance minister meant, but if I talk in general of what those words mean, increasing the tax net is to bring more people into the tax system. That is currently, if you have 100 people paying tax, you want to bring in 100 and make it 150 or 200, so that those who don't pay any form of taxes to be paying taxes. So I think, I must say, this government took a good initiative, although there are a lot of opposition to it on the streets of Sri Lanka, that when they imposed the VAT on the wholesale retail trade, there are a lot of opposition to it. When they brought the threshold down to 12 million, the normal threshold for VAT 12 million, they brought it down to 12 million for all wholesale retailers. I thought that was a fantastic move, because currently if you take the tax net, the importers are in the tax net, the manufacturers are in the tax net, the banks are in the tax net, finance companies in the tax net, service providers are there. So it's a wholesale retail trade sector that is so large that is not in the tax net, and they wanted to bring it into the tax system. But due to a lot of opposition, they couldn't extend it the way that they wanted, but I think still they have managed to keep it for 50 million rupees and above. So I think the tax net definitely will increase. In fact, that is with regard to the number of people paying tax by imposing additional taxes. To answer your question, that is, if you say, you ask a question, are more people going to pay more tax? They might, because those who don't pay tax now, when they start paying tax, they'll pass it down. Number two, with regard to tax administration, yes, there is always, successive governments every year has been investing a lot on improving tax administration. And I think now, after a long time, the Illinois Department has introduced what is called the Revenue Administration Management Information System. It's a fully computerized platform, and it's integrated. So if I sell to you, or if I buy from you, you are in the system and I'm in the system. So from my sales, you can check your purchases. So I was told last week by the Commissioner General that because of the RAMIS in the first 6 months or 3 months of implementation, they were able to increase VAT by 25 billion rupees. I mean, they attributed to that. So I suppose that's what the finance minister is meaning. So when you increase, you improve administration, you impose additional taxes or bring more people into the net, obviously your revenue has to go up.
So progressive taxation is quite important, direct and indirect taxes. Let me point out a few indirect taxes where the government can really collect license fees of luxury vehicles, property taxes, stamp duties, and also capital gain taxes. Now you have two gentlemen on your right, Anushka and Shiran, who are against capital gain taxes, saying that this is not the way forward. You said that, excuse me, the super gain tax, yes, the super gain tax. When it comes to capital gain taxes, what is the really way forward for a country like Sri Lanka? You have capital gain taxes coming into play for the first time, hopefully. What exactly is it?
No, I think capital gains tax Sri Lanka always had. In 2001 or 2002, they abolished capital gains tax. So we didn't have CGT for the last 16 years. So if the government was introduced, it is again a question of revenue, right? So if the government wants additional revenue, then you have to get it from someone. And generally capital gains will accrue to someone who has money. So whether it is good or bad is a different issue. But I think if a government wants to increase revenue, then I guess they have to tap all areas or resources from where they can get the money. And I think capital gains tax, so long as the percentage is fair, I don't think many people will grumble about it, in my view.
Thank you very much, Devinder, for your thoughts in the third round. I'm sorry, Anushka and Shiran, for misquoting you there for a second. I thought I missed the entire proposition of you saying about super gain taxes and capital gain taxes. I beg your pardon. Let me open the floor for questions from our journalists again. Let me start off with Sonali.
Thanks, Shamir. Anushka, this question is to you. In the opening round, you mentioned the importance of having a development-oriented budget. So in terms of development, we have the megapolis on the one hand, we have proposals for a financial city on the other. Do you think this really should be our priority? I mean, is this the way forward for Sri Lanka? Don't we have other things to do before looking into setting up a megapolis and a financial city in Sri Lanka?
So Sonali, on the development-oriented budget, I was responding to, I think, a quote from the finance minister. But I think the point you're making is valid. There's a concern on where prioritization should be. But let me put it differently. Like I mentioned earlier, for a few years now, Sri Lanka's growth trajectory had been quite restricted to a certain number of sectors. We had been relying on a post-war bump and, injecting the economy with energy from time to time and hoping that it'll last, which it didn't. So I don't think it's a bad thing to look for new drivers of growth. And that is where I think projects like Megapolis, Financial City, various other new initiatives is not a bad idea. It's no different to, in the earlier regime, they talked about these new hubs, whether it was maritime or aviation. I think it's a good thing to constantly look for new drivers of growth. And the Megapolis certainly can be that, because there's a lot to gain from consolidating the western provinces' competitive edge. We have the port, we have the airport, we have industries already set up. So what can we do more with it and really make it competitive, a competitive city in South Asia and in Asia? But that shouldn't come at the expense, or at least we should try and balance. Balancing is hard with priorities, but we should at least try and give equal, if not close enough attention to other parts of the country where similar experiments and initiatives could have big gains. I've always been a proponent of continuing to invest in Hambantota. We've built that infrastructure. Why waste it? Let's make full use of it. There's huge potential in Trinco, in Mana, in Jaffna, Central Province area also we need to look at hubs. So I think we need, while acknowledging that Megapolis is good, it can be a new driver, a whole lot of new investment opportunities. I hope that it doesn't suck out all the energy and all the attention at the expense of these other areas, because not only because we are trying to be inclusive and take development island-wide because it feels good, but it makes economic sense also, because if just one province is growing really fast and the rest aren't, it's not good for economic growth. But simply put, I think it's good that these new initiatives, new projects are coming up.
So you spoke of new drivers as well. How do you view the ETCA agreement? Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe a few days ago said that this agreement will be signed in December, by the end of the year. But as of now, as of today, we don't have a proper draft of the ETCA. So this is a new initiative. Do you think this could be successful, and do you think this is the right thing to do?
Sonali, with your permission, can I direct that question to Shiran, if you don't mind, please? Shiran, you may answer that question, and we'll talk a little bit about ETCA and the way forward for a country like Sri Lanka. Yes.
So, if you look at the concept itself, it's basically free trade agreements, something that we've sort of not been getting ourselves into, and also plugging into these value chains. Yes, I think the private sector, in particular, a lot of the chambers should have privilege to sort of see what's in the document before you sort of get into it. But the steps are being taken to sort of get into the right direction. So it could be ECTA, it could be the FTA with Singapore, China, Turkey. All these are part of that plan to grow exports, grow our services.
So free trade agreements are important, but is this the way to bring in a free trade agreement with a country like Sri Lanka, India and Sri Lanka, given the past that we've experienced with India?
You have to look at the past agreement as well and see where that reconcile some of the differences. Why a lot of the business is going out of the agreement, the previous agreement as well. But it's not only the agreement that's necessary. So, for example, I think a lot of businesses in Sri Lanka are able to do business in Bangladesh without an agreement even being in place. And then be quite successful in sort of getting their products there as well. So even with an agreement or without, businesses will still continue. But it's just with this particular agreement, what does it mean in terms of Sri Lanka and whether we'll be able to fully capitalize on it?
Yes, Anushka.
Yes, just maybe I make 3 or 4 observations, Sonali, to your question. The first is, I have to clarify, the government has shared the draft ETCA Sri Lanka side draft with the chambers of commerce, with associations like ESL, with the Ceylon chamber.
However, the wider audience, the wider stakeholders
Yeah.
are the general public who are affected by this agreement,
Yeah, I think
potentially.
the public are a stakeholder, the private sector is also a stakeholder, but you're right, I don't see anything wrong in more people in Sri Lanka knowing about it in a way that doesn't, you know, reduce Sri Lanka's negotiating position, because of course I don't think even the private sector chambers will be given the final draft the night before it's signed, because there's a lot of negotiation that happens and we have to trust our country's negotiators to do a good job after we have given inputs, and we are constantly being asked for inputs. But you're right, I think there should be something that goes out to the public. So the first is that the chambers are involved. The second is we have to one of the good things that's happening through the ETCA process is that a lot of issues, gripes that the private sector traders have faced with the existing India-Sri Lanka FTA are getting resolved, and those hadn't been getting resolved for many years. The SEPA process earlier actually kick-started that. Before even they got to talking about SEPA, they were talking about how can we fix the problems with the FTA. We're seeing that again now, so I think that's positive, a positive outcome of the ETCA, that it's rebalancing, fixing, making the current agreement or the current trading arrangement better. The third, I think, is to look at what agreements like ETCA do. And Shiran is right, you know, a lot of trade happens with countries without an FTA. What FTAs like this do is bring in a rules-based regime. Right now, if you're trading with Bangladesh and you have an issue, there isn't a bilateral rules-based regime. Under ETCA, you can have that. Under Singapore or China or Turkey, it helps businesses because there is a rule, there's a set of rules. And the final point I make is, you know, this is a new initiative, but I would see this as part of a basket of initiatives without just looking at ETCA. If we can get ETCA done, if we can get and done well in a way that benefits both sides. Same with China, same with Singapore, same with Turkey. And we expand the one we have right now with Pakistan, we have this suite of FTAs that suddenly give any domestic industrialist or a foreign investor access to a much bigger market than our 20 million market. And I think that for me is the new initiative. Opening Sri Lanka to these new markets which we weren't before, which gives an added reason for a foreign investor to come here, an added bigger market for a domestic industry here to expand to.
Govinda, I'll ask you this question on the subject of trade. Do you think that by expanding our trade relations, by boosting trade through agreements like ETCA, the free trade agreement on the cards with regard to Singapore and also with Turkey, I think the Prime Minister also mentioned an economic cooperation agreement with Japan, also with China. Do you think that this is sort of, we were talking about low-hanging fruit earlier, do you think that this is also sort of low-hanging fruit that we can use to boost growth also in jobs and also in getting out of debt? Mainly in your case, I pose this question to you, of course, from the debt perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I guess any initiative that would boost trade, would increase investments, is good for the country. The issue is what those areas are. I have not been I have been following it. I have been representing the Institute of Chartered Accountants on behalf of the Institute with the government, and try to see what exactly is the areas with regard to services, because you see, with India the free trade agreement covers most of the goods are now in the possible not in the negative list. So in the ETCA, the balance that to cover is the other services. So we are very interested to see what these services that are going to be covered. But the minister has told us that there is no mobility of people. So to answer your question, so I don't know what level industry will start, new industry will start, trade will increase in the immediate aftermath of ETCA. So certainly if companies, as you said, can export duty-free to markets that we couldn't hitherto export duty-free.
What about in terms of boosting the government's revenue as well?
Yes, I mean, exports, the government revenue will get boosted only if new industry starts. So if there is expansion in the economy with new industries coming, of course the sources of taxation will increase. So if the government is not going to extend any more tax concession, which I think is the current policy, which I think is very commendable, then exports are subject to taxation. So then every point, I mean, although you don't get tax at the point of entry or goods leaving the country, you create a domestic economy, and there will always be enhanced tax revenues.
Shiran, I'll pose this question to you. There is a fear sort of among the general public, and this is what is put forward by the protectionists as well, is that trade agreements like ETCA generally only benefit the rich. Do you agree?
You mean the rich country or the
rich in the country?
The rich in the country. Well, it's supposed to benefit the businesses, I guess. But I think that has to do with the whole perception, how it's sort of being sold, how ECTA is being, even the PR of ECTA or what is in the content. So if you look at ECTA, or if you look at Megapolis, or if you look at the IFC, the common issue with all three of them is the lack of communication and the lack of public relations when it comes to explaining it to the common man, to the masses. So maybe you and I will sort of understand maybe the face value or sort of the nitty-gritties of it.
Okay, so let's break
it
it down. I actually asked this question from a representative of the Agency for International Trade a couple of weeks ago, well, again, the answer was quite complex, but maybe you can give me a simple answer. I'm a plumber. I work generally in Colombo. How does ETCA benefit me? Hypothetically.
Well, if you're domestic, if you've been plumbing in Sri Lanka and the markets, you've sort of saturated your market and you can't really grow in it, and you sort of see India as your next destination for plumbing, then the agreement would sort of help you get into that market. Or if you were to want more investments or investment into the plumbing industry, or you want to grow domestically.
Again, I'm looking for a very simple answer.
Let's move on from ETCA to the budget 2017.
Anushka's thoughts.
I need to move to Fazal. Fazal, tell me, the export sector in Sri Lanka, where do we really have to move forward? What must we really achieve? And what is your message or advice to the government? How can we really move forward? You speak about a policy, you speak of consistent policy, but can we really do it given the current conditions?
Your question is it's not easy to answer in one short answer, but the fact is ETCA is one way of going forward where exports are concerned. The other is we need to enlarge the basket of the current products that we have as traditional and bring in new services, products, etc., as we discussed earlier. We need to be competitive. One thing that we in Sri Lanka we find is that our lack of competitiveness. We need to be compliant with quality. We need to have a sustainable supply of whatever the raw material or product to be able to continue supplying the global market space. Now, then we need to look at which sectors that will actually thrive in this kind of competitive environment that we all trade globally. If you take South Korea, for example, from soft toys they went into high tech because they are not competitive in soft toys. So we need to do a market scan and see where is our competitiveness. Then look at the sectors, like Anushka said, have a broader, you assist the broader the sectors and see where you can help which sector to thrive more. Right now the ITC sector is thriving. So there are sectors that can benefit to take exports forward.
Being an exporter, can you make money given the current conditions?
The honest answer is right now we have invested money in our businesses. We can't afford to close shop and literally go because we can't make money. We need to find ways of innovating our business to make money from what we have, improving our skill set, improving our efficiencies, because we are living in a world that is competitive. So we live with the realities of what we have and we try to survive by doing something different, better, even in a different market space.
Sonali?
Mr. Mushin, my final question is to you. I'd like to touch on one aspect of export income. Why are we still relying on the money brought in by Sri Lanka's housemaids who work in the Middle East? As a result, they suffer, the majority suffer physical, psychological, sexual assault, sometimes death. As a result, there's broken families. This is 2016. Why are we still relying on this? Why?
This is a question we ask government most often when we meet them, that we should be actually ashamed of ourselves of exporting housemaids. There you have to look at the social fabric of Sri Lanka and the level of investment we make into education, and we need to engage these people in giving them a different skill set than just being housemaids. If you look at the productivity of labor in this country, it is about 40%. If you look at the productivity of female labor in this country, half of them are at home. So if you compare this to other countries, Singapore's productivity is around 65%. So we need to upgrade the skill set of these housemaids to do different things than go as housemaids, because today the fact is that we are relying on them, and it is not a nice thing to be it's a shameful thing to be shipping housemaids to get foreign exchange. But
Anushka, we're kind of swaying away from the topic here. Earlier during the show, you said we should impose taxes to places where it shouldn't hurt and where it's required. But having said that, there have been taxes after tax being imposed since late, and two of them would quite necessarily be vehicles and medicine. Now, are these two sectors not areas where it hurts?
I think, Shaheen, you need to look at firstly on, let's take motor vehicles, and we have a tax expert here, so I won't go into too much detail. But as someone who drives a vehicle and would aspire to buying an even better vehicle someday, I think we need to tax at the level that people can afford. There's an aspirational middle class that's emerging in Sri Lanka that wants to buy a car for the first time, maybe move from bus to a small car, or from a motorbike to a small car. So what are we doing? What is the tax rate we're charging for that versus what is the tax rate we're charging for super luxury vehicles? That's my personal view, that we need to be smart about it. Then also so that it doesn't hurt, and it taxes.
It clearly is hurting right now.
Yeah, and it taxes more sensibly where people can afford it. The other thing is we keep flogging the same horse like motor vehicles to get more tax, and often what happens is we go through these cycles of sudden increase in motor vehicles, so sudden increase in the tax on them, then suddenly the motor vehicle imports drop, and then we're left with less revenue. I think we need to get more sensible, an optimum level of tax. What is the most we can increase the tax without killing off the demand, and also without going through these sudden highs and sudden lows. But for that, it goes back to the point made earlier, we need to broaden our tax base without only relying on a few.
But correct me if I'm wrong, I suppose that tax was imposed because apparently there was a huge traffic crisis in Sri Lanka. Do you buy that? Slapping a huge tax on vehicles and then suddenly the traffic situation will resolve itself?
I mean, I don't think that a sustainable solution to a traffic crisis is stopping people who want to buy and drive a car from buying and driving a car. I can see why policymakers would do that if the traffic gets so bad that you have to do that to stop, but I think we need to focus equally, or if not more, on public transport, because people aspire to owning and driving a car, but they may get off that if there is public transport. And this is where again it comes down to revenue. Where are we investing our money? We need to be saving on unnecessary spending on loss-making SOEs, for instance, and invest in public transport so that you can switch people away from cars to public transport and reduce traffic without hammering them over and over again with taxes.
Your thoughts on this? What is the way forward for a country like Sri Lanka? Taxation, how do we really tax people, if not for imposing a tax on vehicles?
You mean taxes in general, you're asking?
In general.
No, it's You see, unfortunately, Sri Lanka has to depend for 80% of the revenue from taxes, as opposed to other countries. So there is no other resource that we can turn. We have no oil, we have no resources that are can be sold in the world market. So the government has to depend on taxes. So taxes are imposed for two reasons: primarily for revenue generation. Two, to resolve issues of this nature sometimes. So for example, if the government does not want to encourage a particular industry, you increase taxes, tobacco and alcohol. Motor vehicle, because at that moment I think there was a foreign exchange crisis, more than the traffic crisis, there was also a foreign currency crisis, and they want to reduce the imports. So what will happen, you increase the taxes on imports, so imports will come down and the bill on foreign currency will be less, or fuel will be less. So I don't think there will ever be an ideal tax situation. I mean, it is an evolutionary process, right? So there will always be a give and take. I mean, an ideal tax situation should be more income tax, less VAT, or less indirect taxes. So the general masses pay what they can afford to pay, and the person who has money can pay more. But in Sri Lanka, we don't have so many people to tax, to get money for income tax. I mean, if you increase the income tax rate to 40%, 50%, then people will not be able to, people will not pay income tax. There will be more default. That is why the successive governments have brought the rates down for greater compliance, and then give more money for companies to spend. So this is always a chicken and egg situation. What is the best tax structure we should have? Whether we should have high indirect taxes, and in that case, where do we tax? So it's very difficult for I don't envy their positions in order to decide before a budget what the structure should be.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your thoughts on the third round. We're now going for a short commercial break. I have not forgotten yet. I will tell you how to get rich after this short commercial break. 2017, a year with money. All this and more after this short commercial break. Stay connected. Stay with Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We are discussing Budget 2017. We'll start off the final round with Shiran Fernando, lead economist, Frontier Research. Shiran, given the current statement that it was made by the Finance Minister, reducing the fiscal deficit to 4.7, will the people have to bear the brunt of all this? Will they have money by the end of 2017? The time starts now.
If the people, you know, in terms of, I think if you look at the number 4.7%, it's not that number particular which matters. I think it's more of how much is actually revenue growing, what the top line growth is on revenue. Then what matters to the people is in terms of the current expenditure, things like on subsidies, on wages, interest payments, things like that, and also the public expenditure, healthcare, education, things like that. So in the past, to get to these numbers, even 2011, when when the deficit was actually coming down, yes, there was a sort of a slowdown in current expenditure, but public expenditure was also slashed to get to these deficits, and you didn't see revenue actually growing. So it was actually sort of tightening that helped us achieve these deficit targets when we were in the early IMF program. So, and the IMF, for example, recognizes this in the current program. They've said, you know, in the past, this is exactly what you've done to get your targets. But what matters this time, and what sort of would maybe not tighten the masses' purses or, you know, belts too much, is if revenue grows and more revenue comes from direct taxes, because right now you're having an imbalance between direct and indirect, then you won't have much tightening. You will have more expenditure on things like education, things like healthcare, and the situation will improve. So you won't really see a crunch per se, and you will achieve your targets.
Shiran, when you really look at the country's economy and the numbers that we're talking about, the cost of living stats on a single digit right now. However, when you go out there and start spending money, you don't have any saving at the end of the day. The cost of living has just gone up. Numbers, does it really reflect the people's pockets at the moment? 2017, what can we expect?
Listen, if you look at the official index, which is the Colombo Consumer Price Index, it's based on a 2006 basket. Pre-2009, consumption patterns have changed. Things like that have changed. Even expenditure, what we exactly spend on food items per se dramatically changed. So it's not really reflective. So if, for example, the September number is 4%, it's not a real reflection of what's going on. But it's not like in the past where it's been above 10% an inflation rate. So we're not growing, or prices aren't growing at that alarming rates. But yes, I mean, you do get with the VAT increases, with certain businesses not being regulated or made to book in terms of taxes and things like that. The consumer does bear the brunt of what goes on in the economy, the fallouts, and therefore when you go to your retail store or your SME shop or whatever, you start to pay more, and that's why possibly you're spending more than the inflation rate.
Thank you very much, Shivam Fernando, lead economist, Frontier Research. I'm now moving my attention to Anushka Vijayasinghe, Chief Economist, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. How can one get rich, Anushka? Last 3 years, we expected the country to have a boom as far as the economy is concerned, but did not take off. Given the current circumstances, how can one get rich? The time starts now.
The easy answer would be to ask Duminder which sectors are going to get less tax and invest in it. Ask Shiran where the 10-year bond would be or stock market would be and invest there. But I think for most people, how does one get rich? How do we go in, if we are low income, from low income to middle class, is a big question. And that is where I think budgets are often tricky, because you ask, will people be richer in 2017? In the budget, it could be, like has been with many other budgets, where there are some generous handouts given, generous subsidies given, a sharp rise in public sector wages, and yes, people will be better off. Some may even be richer in that year because of it. But it may hurt us in the longer run. It may hurt the economy in the longer run if we don't do it properly. So I don't know whether budget can bring about prosperity in a year. How does one get rich in 2017? I don't know whether we are pinning too many hopes on a thing like a budget. But if the budget can set in motion a sensible fiscal consolidation strategy that doesn't hurt too much but puts us on the right path, I think people will gain. You asked about cost of living. I think we often think about prices, prices that are pushing your cost of living up or your affordability. We need an economy that pushes incomes up, so that even with, let's say, prices edging up as the economy develops, you have more in your pocket to spend. You have, and that is where some of the policy issues that was talked about on the panel will really help, because I think we need to look at the incomes. How do we create more jobs, better jobs that people are aspiring to? And some elements of the budget can do that. But of course, we are really pinning our hopes a lot on a real economic strategy that the Prime Minister is going to announce, which will help people become rich over the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years.
Will the Minister of Finance have the magic wand this time around? Will he give incentives as expected? Will the people have some saving power at the end of the year 2017? Will he have the magic wand this time around?
I don't have a magic ball to answer that, but we're hoping
one
it'll
thing
be better
is for
than
sure,
last
Anushka,
year.
you said about bonds. You have companies making a profit of 11 billion rupees overnight, established in the year 2013. There you go. You have the money. And the way to go is the bond market. Right. Do we now focus our attention on Duminder? Duminder, given your speakers, you heard Mr. Fazal, Shiran and Anushka. You started off this show saying that you're very bullish about the country's economy. It's nearly 1.5 hours now. Have you changed your mind?
No, I have not, because I always believe that there's very little that the governments can do for you. If you look at most businesses that are very successful today, whether it's export, manufacturing, trading, all what people have achieved by themselves. The governments will create the conducive environment in terms of peace, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the law and order. It is up to us to prosper, if you want to find opportunity, whether it's in this country or other countries, is all up to us. If you look at most successful entrepreneurs today, have made up on their own. So that's why I say the budgets, I don't think you can expect, or successive budgets, if you read all the budget speeches of the last 17 years, you will find very flowery language from rural development to agriculture to tourism to everything, you know, but there's all just words. It is all up to businesses to do well if they want to, and so that is why I said you have to be bullish only if you think big, and if you think positive, that you develop and prosper. So in terms of a budget will always only give the tax policy in my view, and the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. Which way is it going? How much is the deficit? How am I going to finance the deficit? How much the interest rates will be? How much the inflation will be? So beyond that, I think it's up to the industries and the companies to take it forward.
It's not easy at the end of the day, Davinder. It's a storm right now, that's for sure.
It's always been the case.
You have Fazal saying that we don't have the right environment, conducive environment, and then you are saying
I think we have gone
you have
through,
to brave this weather and
sure,
move
I think we have
forward.
gone through. We have gone through bigger crisis than this. I mean, in 1889, when we were students, when we were studying, I mean, we found bodies buried on one side, the northern one on the other side. But the country progressed. We went through, in my view, 30 years of war versus now. We're still better off. And we rains well, we get 5%, 6% growth anyway. That's my view.
Thank you very much, Davinder. I spoke to a few individuals the other day, and they said the tea industry in Sri Lanka is completing 150 years, and tea is never a dying industry. What is important at the end of the day is to ensure that the tea market is liberalized, open for business. Probably you can make the Hamad report as the hub for Sri Lankan tea, and then you export it, and that is the way forward. Before we move to Fazal, a very quick question to you, Davinder. You say that you view the American elections, you've heard to Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and your organization is the 11th largest privately owned organization in the United States. Any bets on the elections, 8th of November?
No, Ernst & Young is all individually held by each country, although it's universal in terms of
based in London,
structure.
obviously, but
Yes.
11th largest in the United States.
I don't know which
you can
way,
make a bet
which way
very
they
quickly.
bet, but if you ask me for which way I bet, I would think that Hillary will win. Yes. I've been watching CNN every morning, so I think Hillary will win is my prediction.
My prediction.
Yeah.
And that's what you pray for? You don't have to answer that.
I don't think I need to answer that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Davinder, for joining us this evening as well. Nice to have you on board.
Thank you.
Seeing you here after 2.5 years or so. Fazal, Musheen, a lot of people say that the problem that Sri Lanka is facing right now is very simple. A, because we are a middle income country now, hence we've lost a lot of incentives. Is it true?
When you say incentives, you are referring to the budget incentives. See, exporters are actually having, in terms of incentives, we have been having sufficient incentives, and I don't think we can complain so much on the incentives that the budget gives. But I would like to think that if we can rally around the Prime Minister's vision, and if the budget can be taking today's context, I mean, leave alone what has happened in the past, if the finance minister can focus his budget around the Prime Minister's vision, given the constraints he has to finance the deficit and the fiscal policies, it's only one aspect for us. Policy, governance, the bureaucracy is a different problem, as a long-term problem that needs to be fixed, and as Anushka says, taking baby steps is better, because there is an opportunity we can capitalize on. The budget is just one aspect of it. So we would like to see a exporter-friendly budget. We are not asking for handouts. I think we are competitive as an industry. We are resilient as businesses. And if it can be around the trade policy of the country, I think it will benefit exports, whether it's local or foreign. And I think whether we negotiate free trade agreements or if we have zones, I think if that's the way forward, we should go that way, because that expands the basket and the business that we get.
So no one knows what the Prime Minister's policy is, Fazal, unfortunately. Does the government have a policy?
Well, we can go by last year's policy. I mean, that's all we got to go by. And we supported that wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, I like to think that everyone in government listens to his policy. And then maybe we can make some progress.
Making progress is not easy. What is your final advice to the President and the Prime Minister?
I can't advise them because I'm not a politician, but I would like to have consistency in whatever each says or does. And I like to think that the government, whether it's coalition partners or government party members, are all rallying around one vision as we drive our companies. We have a vision, we set our goals, and we drive towards achieving those goals. And we maximize our productivity, efficiencies, and minimize our costs.
Thank you very much, Fazal Musheen, Chairman of the Export Association of Sri Lanka, for joining us this evening on the show. Shiran Fernando, Lead Economist, Frontier Research. Anushka Vijayasinghe, Chief Economist, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Nice to have you on board again, Anushka. Joining us this evening was also Dumindu Hulangamo, our partner, E&Y Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Nadim. Thank you very much, Sonali. Thank you very much, Shahin, for joining us this evening. Nice to have you on board. Looking forward to seeing you next week as well, hopefully. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I want to leave you tonight with a quote, as I usually do. Government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. Some food for thought. Take care and good night. Budget 2017. Will it make you rich? We'll have to wait and see. Take care and good night.